So it feels really nice to be back at DevOps Days this year. Last year I gave a talk about how you guys could get better sleep. And this year I want to talk with you all about working with assholes. And after some of the conversations I've had with many of you, it seems like this is a pretty salient issue that a lot of us can relate to. And I just think we all could be doing more to help with this issue in the workplace. So who here has ever been personally victimized by Regina George? Yeah, I think a lot of us have. I think a lot of us have worked with a Regina George, somebody who just takes up the entire room and makes everything about them and just finds those ways to kind of cut and jab and just make you feel horrible about yourself. So let's just kind of picture this. It's Monday. No one's really happy to be back at work. You're having to kind of come in. You're hoping to meet with some of your colleagues, talk about the fun things that happened over the weekend, and just kind of prep for that weekly kickoff meeting that you know you're going to have with the office asshole. And just being around this person, it makes your skin crawl. Anytime they open their mouth, it just kind of, you die a little inside because you know they're just going to say something shitty to you or about just you're not good enough ever for them. So it's really hard to deal with those kinds of people. And that behavior and those things they say to you, they are contagious in nature. We don't think about our emotions being contagious like a flu bug, but they are. And so what does this mean when we're working with assholes? The rest of you are all susceptible to becoming assholes. And that's why we need to not allow this in our workplace. It's just, the research shows that our emotions are just as contagious as any other illness. And this concept is referred to as emotional contagion. And what this means is that our emotions are just as likely to be picked up or transferred among employees within an organization, impacting how those groups can work together. So this is also just kind of the process in which a certain person or a group can influence or impact, whether consciously or unconsciously, the emotional states or behaviors of others within an organization. And so again, when it comes to working with assholes, if they're just injecting these negative comments into your day every day, that's gonna start making you feel like you're gonna become more negative or potentially give in to these asshole behaviors and just become one yourself because it's easier to do that than have to fight it constantly. I don't know where my slides went, okay. So if we have people who are continually doing this in an organization, it's gonna drive people away, I'd hope. I hope you don't wanna put up with it, or I'd hope your organization might wanna do something about it, maybe drive those people away, so that way they're not doing this to you anymore. So in some research conducted by a professor at a Stanford University called Dr. Sutton, he refers to these types of individuals as certified assholes. And that's gonna be the emphasis of my talk, is how we're gonna deal with these certified assholes and helping you understand the difference between a temporary asshole and a certified asshole. So today, I'd like to talk to you all about what makes someone a certified asshole and how those behaviors are directly impacting you, your organization, your teams, and what can be done about these things to help improve the quality of life you have at work and also outside of work. So first, let's talk about the difference between a temporary and a certified asshole. I've been a temporary asshole. I'm sure you all have too. These are people who generally treat people with dignity and respect and feel bad if they hurt someone's feelings, but we all have an off day, right? Sometimes shit happens and you just don't feel great. However, a certified asshole, this is someone who is doing these things purposefully with the intent of harming you emotionally. They are doing this to display power over you and to show that they are dominant in this environment. They also choose to just intentionally hurt others constantly and display these patterns of behavior consistently. And they tend to have a track record, you could say, of showing this type of demeanor across not just the workplace they're currently at, but probably at places they've worked at prior. So for the purpose of this talk, I do want to talk about just more of the psychological aspects that these people inflict onto others, but there are some physical aspects too of things they're doing that are negatively impacting you. Let's see. They also tend to make their targets or victims feel belittled, put down, de-energized, and just generally worse about themselves. And that's just not a fun place to have to go work. Like, you're already there doing something that you're doing to make money, because we all need money to get by. The last thing you want is somebody working with you who's just constantly being shitty to you and making you feel bad about you and your work. So what are some of the tactics that you might see a certified asshole do? A lot of their tactics are going to include uninvited physical contact, personal insults, threats, intimidation, maybe some sarcastic jokes or teasing, bullying, flaming people in communication channels. This could include public shaming and a myriad of other tactics that they use to kind of just show you who they think is the boss. A lot of the times these things are done in public because that helps to display their dominance over you and feed their power ego, because these are the type of people who seem to get like energy from putting others down because it makes them feel better about themselves. These are also all types of workplace bullying. And so if you're noticing these things going on within your organization, I'm sure in your HR handbook somewhere it talks about how these are not okay and they're not allowed by your company. So if you're noticing these behaviors happening, I'd hope you'd feel comfortable to go to HR and mention that these are being experienced within your team. People who are behaving this way, though, they're not only damaging their target, these behaviors also damage the witnesses of these events as well. And especially if you're working with a group of maybe underrepresented or minority people in a workplace who already don't feel safe, witnessing these types of events, it's not going to make them feel any more safe to be at work. And that's the last place you want to be and feel unsafe to be there. So these negative things these assholes are doing to us, it's not only going to affect the morale of your office or the ability for your teams to work together, it's also going to cost your organization real money. And so for those of you who have the decision-making power, I'm going to get into a little bit maybe the aspects you might care a little more about from the financial perspective and how one asshole can affect your bottom line and cost your company millions of dollars. But first, let's start off with kind of going into what is psychological aggression, what is workplace bullying. And psychological aggression refers to the verbal and behavioral acts that are intended to humiliate, criticize, blame, dominate, isolate, intimidate, and threaten someone. And that's just not what we should be having happen at work. These tie directly to the tactics that Dr. Sutton referenced in his book about how certified assholes behave. They use psychological aggression to dig their nails deeper and deeper into your brain to make you feel like you are worthless and not worth being on that team, or that somehow they're like benefiting you by giving you like time out of their day, like they're helping you out somehow by telling you horrible things about yourself. And that's not going to make anybody feel very good. At times, this can also come across as maybe sort of a passive way that they think they're helping you by like giving you insights or kind of filling you in on maybe things you didn't think you knew about yourself already, but really it's just hurtful things that aren't helping you at all to do a better job. I personally equate this type of behavior to kind of like gaslighting, but that wasn't specifically called out in the research literature, but that's how it comes across to me. So these are also all examples of workplace bullying, which is behavior in the workplace that damages the overall health and physical and mental health of targets, and this is abusive. So we just need to be highly aware of these situations going on in the workplace and reporting it to the proper channels when we see it happening. So let's kind of go into the less happy aspects of this talk, which are some of the negative consequences that people are experiencing from working with assholes. And these are all consequences of workplace bullying and psychological aggression. They include things like increased symptoms of depression, increased symptoms of anxiety, potential PTSD symptomology. Like, could you imagine getting PTSD just from working with someone? That's not okay. And they also include increased turnover intentions, increased intentions for your employees to want to quit working at your company. And the biggest thing to me, working with an asshole now makes it to where these victims are more likely to become assholes themselves because they get so tired of fighting with these people that they're just like, whatever, I'll just join in. So now you're creating a systemic problem within your organization where people feel more comfortable being an asshole than just being kind to each other. And to me, that's not okay. We shouldn't want to treat each other that way. This also then begins to impact your organization as a whole, because if you have just this team of assholes that's working with other teams, it's going to then just infiltrate your system and become such a problem that you can't stop it. So then, let's see. I went through that. Sorry. Oh, yeah. Another major topic for me is how working with assholes can stifle your creativity. And I know as engineers, being creative is paramount to your job. You have to come up with creative solutions to problems that sometimes have never come up before. So how are you supposed to do that when you have someone working with you telling you that you're not good enough or that your ideas aren't good enough for your company? You're not going to. You're either going to stop suggesting solutions, or you're going to go to a company who's going to listen to your ideas and treat you with dignity and respect. You're not going to stick around somewhere where you're just being treated horribly all the time. So I wish that the list of psychological issues would be enough for organizations to maybe care more. It's probably not. I wish that there was a greater understanding of how these psychological problems are not short-term. They stick with people for years. Counseling costs a lot of money. Trying to get over these issues can cost a lot of money. And I wish organizations would just not hire assholes so you guys as employees aren't having to deal with these consequences from somebody being awful to you, but it's probably not. So let's talk about a few more issues that they're going to cause. Physiologically, in studies conducted over several years, about 3 to 5 years, and with multiple groups across the country, we have seen that working with assholes has caused increased rates in cardiovascular disease, increased rates of fibromyalgia, poorer sleep quality, and also just general overall fatigue. And these were not just short-term issues. Many of the participants in these studies were measured at an initial intake, and then in some of these studies, they lasted between 3 to 5 years, and these symptoms were still seen. So it's not a short-term side effect. These assholes are causing long-term problems in people's lives and could potentially be changing or altering their quality of life forever. I mean, if you have an increased rate of cardiovascular disease, you can't undo that damage to your heart, right? So I wish that these would all be enough, but instead they're not, and we're gonna talk about something companies might care about, which is money, and how these assholes, specifically one asshole, and what that one asshole is gonna cost an organization just in turnover costs from the people that they're gonna drive away. So in research conducted by Rayner and Keshley out of the UK, they found that 25% of targets of workplace bullying and 20% of those who have witnessed workplace bullying will leave their jobs. They'll quit. They will go somewhere else where they will be treated right. The average rate in which bullying is reported in the workplace is about 15%. So looking at it from this perspective, we have one asshole and 3 victims. So we have a 3-to-1 asshole to victim ratio, or victim to asshole ratio. That's a lot of people impacted by one bad person. And I just can't wait for you to see these numbers because it gets insane. So let's say your company has 1,000 employees. There's a 15% bullying rate that's getting reported. That's gonna impact about 150 employees at your company. Out of those 150 employees, 25% of them leave. That means you're losing about 37 employees in a year. Now let's put some numbers to that. To replace each one of those employees, it's gonna cost you about $20,000. That's gonna include things like paying your HR team to onboard and hire and interview, potentially part of your legal team if that asshole caused any other problems, maybe hiring an outside recruiting team to help offset all of this. And that's a lot of money. So using all of that together, that could cost your company about $750,000 in 1 year just from the direct victims of one asshole, right? Now, back to the previous image, we also talked about how there's 2 witnesses to each one of these events. So that's going to add 75 more employees who are leaving your company in a year. That's gonna add $1.5 million in cost to your organization, affecting your bottom line, right? So adding that together, that puts your cost at about $2.25 million from one person in your company driving people away. I think that's pretty crazy. I wouldn't want to keep that person around. That's a lot of money to lose. So looking at that, not only have you lost $2.25 million, you've also lost about 112 employees, right? That's a lot of people. In that loss, you've lost all of their knowledge, all of the ins and outs that they knew about your company, and some of those things cannot be taught on the fly. Some of those things only come with being at a company for a long time. And I just can't imagine that those costs are even calculable, losing maybe some of the best team members you had. You're also losing any of those inter-office networking they had created, which is gonna affect your teams as well. So we're letting this one asshole cost your company millions of dollars, drive away 112 people. Are they worth keeping around? Is that worth it to you? I just can't imagine that it is. So what can we do about working with these assholes? We've just seen what they cost us psychologically, what they're costing us to our physical health, and then also what they're costing organizations just to keep them around. Oh, and I didn't factor in that you're still paying them a salary and all of their benefits as well. So there's even more money they're costing you. So the research would suggest that the first thing you can do is some self-actualization. And Dr. Sutton says to avoid acting like or becoming a known asshole, know thyself. So it's really important to be giving yourself regular self-check-ins on whoa, am I an asshole? Was that rude? Should I have not said that? maybe I should go apologize to that person. Check in with yourself regularly to make sure that you are not becoming the problem. Like, a lot of us have issues doing that, just checking in, like, did I do that? You know? But try to do that more regularly, especially if it seems like maybe you offended someone. Check in with that person and make sure everything's okay. We're all adults, and we have the power to change our behavior. So if that's something that you think maybe you are becoming the asshole, way to check in, and then seek help, you know? There are plenty of counselors and psychologists out there who can help you with behavior change plans, or just even reading an article online might help you find some tips or tricks on how you can implement small changes in your day-to-day to have better communication with people. Maybe changing how you phrase some things might help. Just small things can make big changes. We're also going to talk more about, as an employee, what you can be doing to kind of deal with working with an asshole. So Dr. Sutton refers to what I call the Da Vinci method. And Leonardo da Vinci once said, "It's easier to resist at the beginning than at the end." And so in short, this means before you ever accept a job somewhere, do your research on that company. Use sites like Glassdoor or your personal network. Like, we have this whole group right here who could probably give you insights about companies that you might be looking at working out. Find out if they hire assholes. Find out if somebody had a problem there and how that situation got handled, if it got handled. That's all information we have thanks to massive networks like this and the internet. So just make sure that you do your research, and if you have the opportunity to pass on that situation, pass on it. It's going to be a lot easier to avoid working with assholes than to try to change the system from within. So, however, some of us are already at companies where we work with assholes. So what do? The research would suggest avoiding them. And I know that sounds really weird. Like, when I read it, I was like, how do you just avoid someone at work? But Dr. Sutton gave some good tips about, like, when it comes to scheduling meetings with these people, try to make them last as short as possible. Or if you're in office still, and you have meeting rooms that have just like standing desks, schedule them in there. Because there's actually research that backs up that standing meetings lasted anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes less than sitting meetings. And the quality of the decisions that were made within those meetings was just as good, if not, I mean, it was the same as longer lasting meetings. I know that sometimes, every company is different, but if you have the ability maybe to teleconference in to a meeting, even if you work face-to-face, just so you can avoid that actual FaceTime with that asshole who's bothering you, that can help your mental health. Or if you're a remote employee and you have the ability to meet face-to-face with these people sometimes, that can help humanize you to that person. Because it's not just working or talking to somebody behind a computer screen. It's like, oh, you're a real person and I have to talk to you now and I can't just say horrible things anymore. So those are also some tips you can try. Other methods would include reframing. And this is actually a technique from psychology that I would suggest if you're truly interested in doing this, maybe working with a psychologist on doing so, because there's right and wrong ways of doing it. But just changing the way you view the situation in your own mind can help lessen the effects this asshole is having on you. And that's one of the best things to me about being a human, is that we have control over our brains, and we can change how we want to think about things. And by doing so, can change how we let things affect us and how we let them impact our quality of life. Also, you can reduce the amount of self-blame that you use whenever something goes wrong. Also, making sure, this isn't in the research, but I call it keeping it Danish, which is set realistic expectations. And even if something's not going well in your company, you can always hope for the best, right? But expect the worst. but just keeping those expectations of dealing with these people realistic. And I thought this was really interesting coming from a psychologist recommending this to people, but just stop caring. Emotionally detach yourself from that person and no longer allow them to have the power to affect you that way, because they don't. They are not, they might be your boss, but they're not the boss of your brain. So choose not to let the negative things they say to you impact how you feel about yourself. And in positive psychology, Dr. Martin Seligman has shown in his research that as individuals, we have the capacity to see hardships in our lives as short-term, not our fault, and without having the ability to change our quality of life outside of work. So if you're experiencing these things, put that into your work bucket and don't let it leave there. Don't take it home if you can, and try to, in your best ability, not let these people have control over the rest of your life or how you feel about yourself. And this is called learned optimism. And we've seen in the research that this can have really positive effects on your mental and physical health, while also improving your ability to be adaptable at work and just in life in general. So trying some of those techniques might help. We can also dismiss whatever insults our souls, as Walt Whitman said, and just don't allow your self-perception to be altered by this treatment that you're receiving. Stop putting all of your time and energy into work. As humans, we're not meant to work 24/7. We're meant to be social. We're meant to enjoy nature and have fun and do things besides just work. So take time to enjoy living each day, or find ways to decompress outside of work so you can get your mind off that asshole you have to deal with. And these methods have shown to help increase overall longevity in people's lives, and it also prevents you from getting taken advantage of. Because if you have more to live for than your job, you're not going to let some jerk boss you around and make you feel worse about yourself because you have other things going on. So I do want to take a moment, though, and, if you can leave the organization, leave. But I know not everybody has that luxury. Not all of us have jobs lined up out the door we can just jump ship to. But if you can leave, I would suggest doing so. If you feel that you're getting disrespected and that nothing's getting done about it, and you've gone through the channels you need to go through, you're not seeing any changes, I wouldn't expect those changes to happen very quickly, and it's probably in your best interest just to remove yourself from the situation. And this was the part in my research that it got really bleak for me as a researcher, because I was like, what else can I tell these people? Like, this seems so sad. But then it made me realize there's so few things that employees can do that organizations need to be caring more about this. It shouldn't all be on the employee to fix this situation. As a company, it is your job to make sure people are working in a safe and healthy work environment. And organizations have a lot more wherewithal than one single employee to fixing these situations. So now I kind of want to go into what an organization can do to help make sure their employees work in a safe work environment. So the first thing they can do is just implement the no asshole rule. Don't hire assholes. It really shouldn't be that hard, but somehow it is. They sneak in there sometimes and then change their behavior later. But there are many large organizations like IBM and Southwest Airlines who have implemented the no asshole rule and have seen great success. The CEO of Southwest Airlines won't even allow asshole customers. And there's actually a story about how he happened to be in the airport one day and overheard a passenger berating one of his desk attendants, and walked over, grabbed the guy, and said, "You know what? No, you're not flying on this flight anymore. I'll take you to United." So, You can do it. You can have these types of things in large organizations and have it work out. So especially starting out in a small startup or in a smaller business, if you start implementing these things early on, it's going to be so much easier to keep it going throughout the rest of your growth. IBM also offers constructive criticism courses to their employees, which I loved this. It just helps teach people how to actually be in meetings properly, where you're not telling somebody that they are bad, just that maybe you don't like their idea. So having things like that offered by companies can really help open up communication channels between people and keep things happening correctly and not turning into like a personal argument about who is better or why this or that. Instead, it's just actually talking about the ideas. Another thing that organizations can do is to use assholes as an example of behavior that they won't tolerate. This can get a little tricky just for legal reasons, because you can't like explicitly say like, hey, Joe got fired because he's a jerk, you know? But there are companies who do come out with kind of press release statements or things like that about why they made a certain change to the structure of their C-suite or things like that, where you can kind of skate the ice a little bit and not give too much detail, but still make it evident that that's behavior you're not going to tolerate and is unacceptable in your company. Also, ensure that your HR department is working the way that they're supposed to, which is to help protect people in the company. So by making sure that your HR department is effectively looking into these situations, tracking if a certain person has repetitive complaints along the same route, and doing something about that is going to be really imperative to the growth and betterment of your company. And if for some reason you can't get rid of this asshole who's costing you millions of dollars and hundreds in employee turnover, I would suggest maybe getting them some mediation coaching on how to interact with people appropriately. General, like if it's leadership, some leadership coaching, or potentially anger management classes. So just to help them grow and become better people. So in this talk, we've gone over emotional contagion, which is how our emotions are just as contagious as any illness. We've talked about temporary versus certified assholes, and how we're all pretty much temporary assholes sometimes, but the certified assholes are real scary. The cost of assholes, both mentally and physically on your well-being, as well as monetarily, what they are actually costing your business to keep around. And to me, the biggest thing is just don't hire assholes, because they're just gonna hire other assholes, and then your whole company is gonna get taken over by assholes. So let's just not do that, let's just stop it. And then I kind of want to take this back to Jay Paul's talk yesterday about it's just us out here, right? So we should be doing our best to make being around each other as pleasant as possible. We're all at work for the same reason, to get paid and to hopefully have some fulfillment from what we're doing. And just being nice to each other shouldn't be that hard. Like, we're taught to be nice in like kindergarten, you know? So as adults, we should just try to maybe hold on to some of those concepts we were taught as children of being nice, and if you can't say something nice, maybe don't say anything at all. So if you're interested in learning any more about what I talked about today, Dr. Sutton wrote 2 really excellent books, and they both have a lot more detail than I could get into in this talk, and a few other suggestions, but I would highly recommend either of those. And I'm Kaylee Koch. I studied industrial organizational psychology at CSU, and I'd love to talk with any of you if you're interested in this topic or anything else that I might have knowledge on. You can find me on Twitter. And I thank you all so much for your time today.
Okay, while we're waiting for our next speaker to get plugged in, let's do some questions. Who's got questions for Kaylee? Over here.
During that process? All right, let me try it again. So how do you avoid hiring these assholes? And does the research show any indication when you're in the interview process of what they might, or some of their traits might be like? Play the mic, Jill. You got it.
There is. I can't tell you off the top of my head. I'd be happy to get you that answer, though. If you want to reach out to me or send me a direct message on Twitter, I'd be happy to get that information to you. Dr. Sutton does cover some of that in his books, but not quite in depth because I think he wants to sell more books. So, but no, there is definitely. And I think it's a lot of just, I might be too metaphysical, but I think there's just a vibe you can pick up on. If somebody seems like they're being a douche, like they're probably not that great to have around, you know? Like, just, I think it's just being more interpersonally aware of how people are being perceived, or if it comes off as kind of a facade. Or some of it, too, doesn't come out until after the interview process, where you start noticing how they're interacting with your team, and then at that point, it's probably a good time, too, to pull the plug and just say, this isn't a good fit.
Okay, great question. What other questions do we have? Is there another one back here?
Do you have any suggestions for someone that would be a passive asshole versus like kind of more of your ones who are more active in that they're targeting people, but one where someone like a senior person that doesn't take their share of the work, or like a good example would be pushes something or frequently pushes something to production and never warns anyone, things like that?
I don't really know if you could say that's passive asshole, so much as maybe just being passive aggressive or maybe not communicating clearly. So I'd say maybe like talk with them and be like, hey, could you like let us know before you're just gonna push stuff? Or I don't know. It's difficult as somebody if you're not also on the leadership team to talk to people in leadership about things they're doing wrong. And that's where I would suggest maybe going to HR about mediation or how to best handle that situation, because that is a difficult spot to be in. But
Another one right here.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of research around microaggressions in workplaces and specifically how they impact minorities and larger pipeline problem. And as part of that, they talk about likening microaggressions to like a bug bite, where you get one, it's easy enough to sort of push to the side, but you get enough and it becomes unbearable for anyone. How do you see that research align with the research that and the suggestions of avoidance that you are making?
When it comes to microaggressions, I would think that at an organizational level, there needs to be more like training on that, and sensitivity training, diversity training, understanding that type of information and what can be considered microaggressions to underrepresented groups and minorities. I think that's probably the first place it needs to start. But again, I feel like if you're noticing those things happening, addressing that to someone, so that way, either if that's HR and letting them know like, hey, these things are continually like happening frequently and it makes me feel like this, or it's making so-and-so feel like this, like that's still an issue that needs to be addressed with that person to help prevent it from becoming a much larger issue down the road. Does that answer your question?
All right, do we have any more? Do one more? Let's do one more here.
So I guess I'm curious, the asshole behavior that you're talking about, I usually see it kind of manifest as an individual's, or especially a leader's, mechanism to express their authority. How do you change the mindset around having to hold that authority and the responsibility associated with it, with driving better behavior?
Especially in leadership, I would suggest they probably need coaching. Because if you have people who are ego tripping and power tripping in leadership roles, it's not okay. And in the research Dr. Sutton did, along with all the other research I referenced in there, that's specifically what they call out, is a lot of the time you notice these behaviors in people who have a much higher standing over other people, and that it is kind of a like, look at me, I'm better than you. But as an employee trying to address that, I think that comes into it's a really sticky situation because assholes are easily offended. And so you don't want to like bow up and try to tell them like, hey, you need to fix this. So some of the suggestions that they gave in the research is to subtly remind them, like if you're getting berated one day, like subtly remind them of all of the responsibilities you actually have in a day and that you'll get to their issue later. Because that kind of helps remind them, like, oh, this person does like 9 things, so I probably shouldn't be riding their butt right now about this. If you read the books, Dr. Sutton goes into it more extensively. There is a way you can like directly address it with them, but the outcomes are not as positive as being a little bit more passive about that. But again, I think if you're noticing issues in your leadership, those are things that need to be addressed with HR, and they probably need some sort of leadership coaching or communication coaching in the least about how to be working with people, because that's not a good leader, so, in my opinion.
Okay. Thank you so much. Let's put your hands together for Kaylee one more time. Great talk. And an excellent way to start the day, too, because those of you who've been coming to DevOps Days for a long time, you probably know better than most of us that DevOps isn't just about the tech. In fact, it's people, process, and tech, and in that order.